The setting sun draped the skyline in ribbons of gold and violet, painting Ethan Carter's corner office in colors more fitting for a cathedral than a corporate tower. From 60 floors up, the city looked like a restless sea of glass and light, an empire he had built from nothing but code, stubbornness, and sleepless nights. The walls gleamed with modern art his decorator had chosen, cold splashes of abstract genius worth more than most people's homes. Yet among all that grandeur, the room carried only one touch of Ethan himself. A worn black chess king, chipped at the base, perched on the edge of his polished desk. His father's final gift, a relic of quiet evenings when life had been simple, when strategy was measured in pawns and not billion-dollar mergers. At 45, Ethan was the very image of a man who had conquered the world. His broad-shouldered frame filled the tailored lines of his custom suit, his dark eyes sharp enough to make board members shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs. A single glance from him could silence a negotiation. Rivals described him as impenetrable, a fortress of intellect and precision. But behind that fortress lived a man who had never learned how to lower the drawbridge. He loosened his tie as the office lights flickered on against the deepening dusk. The air felt too large, too empty, as it always did when the last of his staff left for the night. Silence pressed against him, broken only by the quiet hum of climate control. For the world, Carter Innovations was a temple of progress, pioneering AI, reshaping medicine, touching lives across continents. For Ethan, it was also a shield, a place where work filled the spaces love never touched. His phone buzzed, the vibration sharp against the desk's glass surface. A message from his mother. "Darling, the Ashfords will be at the gala next week. Their daughter Laya is simply radious." "Net, I've told her you'll save her a dance." Ethan exhaled, long and tired. Another arrangement disguised as chance. Another polished smile hiding behind champagne flutes. His mother's obsession with marrying him off had become a ritual as relentless as the ticking of the city's clock. Socialite after socialite, heiress after heiress, all drawn to the Carter fortune like moths to flame. He had mastered the art of polite refusal, of attending galas alone, of making his excuses sound like strategy rather than disinterest. The truth was simpler. He didn't know how. He could stand unflinching before an aggressive investor. He could dismantle a hostile takeover with a single clause in a contract. But the moment a woman's gaze lingered too long, his composure cracked. Words tangled in his throat, leaving him to retreat behind the safe walls of spreadsheets and strategy. The world called him powerful, but inside, he still carried the awkward boy who once spent prom night debugging code while his classmates danced under paper lanterns. Ethan's hand brushed the chess king, his thumb tracing the groove worn into its side. His father's voice echoed in memory, quiet but firm. "All the money in the world won't keep you warm at night, son. Don't forget the real battles are not fought in boardrooms but in hearts." He had forgotten, or perhaps he had never truly understood. The glow of the city beyond his glass wall shimmered like a promise of connection, of life moving in millions of stories far richer than his. Yet in the stillness of his office, Ethan Carter sat alone. The world saw him as a man who had everything. Inside, he felt like a man who had built a fortress so tall even he no longer knew the way out. Tonight, as the lights below blurred into constellations of possibility, he realized with a pang that despite all his wealth, despite the empire he had carved into the city's bones, he had never been lonelier. And though he would never admit it aloud, not even to himself, the Black King at his side was the only witness to how hollow victory could feel. The morning sun spilled across the sleek glass walls of Carter Innovations, turning the medical research wing into a prism of light. The building itself looked like it belonged in the future, all steel and elegance, but for Amara, it felt overwhelming. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she clutched the thin folder of HR paperwork to her chest. This was supposed to be her dream come true. Years of relentless study, long nights in sterile labs, sacrifices that had cost her friendships and moments of youth. All of it had led here. And yet on her very first day, she was already late. A traffic accident had trapped her taxi in gridlock, and by the time she stepped into the towering lobby, her nerves buzzed like live wires. She smoothed her skirt, forced a polite smile for the receptionist, and hurried after the HR director, who walked briskly through endless corridors. "The research wing is through here," the director explained, checking her tablet with machine-like precision. "Security will finalize your badge later today. For now, stay close." Amara nodded, trying to steady her breath. Every hallway gleamed with possibility. Transparent walls revealed labs filled with cutting-edge technology. Screens scrolled with live data, numbers and graphs pulsing with promise. This was the place where lives would be changed, where cures might be born. Her stomach twisted, not from fear of failure, but from the gnawing weight of expectation. As they rounded a corner, the heel of her shoe snagged against the edge of a decorative rug. She pitched forward with a startled gasp, arms flailing for balance. The folder flew from her grip, and worse, her shoulder slammed into a tall glass display case. For one dreadful heartbeat, time froze. Inside the case sat an antique chess set, its carved pieces arranged in perfect order. Then came the sound that would haunt her forever. The glass trembled, the board shifted, and one by one the elegant ivory and ebony figures tumbled down. Pawns rolled across the marble floor like scattered bones. The white queen spun wildly before clattering to a stop. Amara's breath locked in her chest. Mortification clawed at her throat. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the priceless pieces, her hands trembling. She expected fury. She expected cold dismissal, the kind that could end her career before it began. The heavy double doors at the end of the corridor opened with a deliberate push, and her worst fear materialized. Ethan Carter himself stepped into view. He looked exactly as the magazines portrayed him, tall, immaculately dressed, with shoulders that carried the weight of an empire. But in person, his presence was sharper, more commanding. His dark eyes scanned the scene, taking in the shattered perfection of the chess display. The young doctor on her knees gathering pieces like a child caught in mischief. Amara braced herself for his anger. Her heart thundered as she held up the nearest piece, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter. Please, I didn't mean—" The unexpected happened. Instead of anger, instead of dismissal, Ethan Carter laughed. It was not the polite chuckle of a corporate figurehead, but something genuine, deep, and warm. A sound so rare it startled even him. The corners of his mouth lifted, softening the hard lines of his face. "I've been meaning to rearrange that display for years," he said, stepping forward to kneel beside her. His large hands reached for the fallen pieces with surprising gentleness. "Though, I'll admit, this method wasn't exactly what I had in mind." Amara blinked, her panic stuttering into disbelief. The mighty CEO of Carter Innovations was kneeling on the floor beside her, laughing as he picked up a pawn. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the white queen, and something jolted through her. A spark, quick and undeniable. Ethan's hand lingered a second too long before he withdrew, the faintest blush coloring his cheeks. For a man known for his icy control, the vulnerability in that moment was as startling as it was human. The HR director cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. "Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Amara, our new head of cardiac regeneration research." Ethan straightened, placing the rescued pieces on a nearby table. His gaze, however, remained on Amara. "Welcome to Carter Innovations, Dr. Amara," he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "I've read your research. Impressive work." Her breath caught. CEOs didn't read dense medical papers published in niche journals. Yet the way he spoke, measured, thoughtful, suggested he truly had. For the first time since stepping into the building, Amara felt seen. Not as a late newcomer, not as a clumsy intruder, but as something more. And Ethan, standing over the scattered remains of his perfectly ordered chess set, realized he had felt more alive in those few chaotic minutes than in years of flawless control. Neither of them knew it yet, but the toppled queen and the laughter it drew from the shy billionaire would mark the beginning of a story that would unravel both their carefully guarded worlds. The executive break room was meant to be a quiet space, a polished haven of marble counters and chrome appliances where department heads could recharge between meetings. For Ethan Carter, it had never been more than a passing stop for bottled water or the occasional black coffee. But in the days following Amara's clumsy collision with his chess set, the break room became something else entirely. A stage for chance encounters that seemed to grow less accidental with every passing day. It began innocently. Ethan had been reviewing quarterly projections when the need for caffeine pushed him from his office. He approached the gleaming European coffee machine with the same caution he gave to hostile takeovers. Its glowing buttons and cryptic sequences mocked him. He pressed the wrong combination and the machine hissed like an offended dragon, spitting out a bitter stream that scalded his palm. A soft voice drifted from behind him. You have to tap the top button twice, then hold the second one for 3 seconds. Otherwise it thinks you're asking for macchiato, which, trust me, you don't want. Ethan turned, and there she was. Dr. Amara, still in her white lab coat, her dark hair pulled back loosely, a strand falling over her cheek. Her presence lit the sterile room in a way no chandelier could. She brushed past him with quiet confidence, her fingers moving across the buttons like a practiced pianist. The machine hummed obediently under her touch, steam curled upward, carrying the rich aroma of fresh espresso. Ethan found himself staring, not at the machine, but at her hands. They were steady, sure, hands that could hold a scalpel or cradle a fragile heart. When she turned to offer him the cup, their fingers brushed, and that same jolt from the chess set returned. He swallowed, trying to summon words, but his throat closed around them. You're welcome, Amara teased gently, her eyes gleaming with amusement at his silence. The next day, the pattern repeated. Ethan, who had never cared for mid-afternoon coffee, found himself timing his schedule to arrive at the break room just as Amara did. Sometimes he arrived early, pretending to study the selection of teas until her footsteps echoed down the hall. He had memorized that sound, the measured click of her heels on polished stone, a rhythm that made his pulse quicken. Their conversations began with small things. The quirks of the building's temperamental machinery, the unpredictable nature of San Francisco traffic, the kind of safe topics that could not expose too much. But as days stretched into weeks, the subjects deepened. They spoke of breakthroughs in regenerative medicine, of Ethan's father teaching him chess, of Amara's dream to make treatment accessible beyond the wealthy elite. Each word peeled back a layer, revealing glimpses of who they were beneath the masks they wore for the world. Still, Ethan remained trapped between his desire and his fear. He could face down entire boards of hostile investors, yet the thought of asking Amara to dinner left his palms damp and his stomach knotted. Nathan, his lifelong friend and CFO, noticed the shift immediately. You drink more coffee in a week than you have in your entire life, Nathan teased one afternoon, barging into Ethan's office. At this rate, you'll float out of here on a tide of espresso. Ethan glared half-heartedly, but his blush betrayed him. The truth was too obvious. The office noticed as well. Whispers spread. The mighty CEO, once untouchable, now aligned his break schedule with a new researcher. The gossip moved through cubicles like wildfire. Some bet on how long before he asked her out. Others wondered if the shy billionaire even knew how. One afternoon, the tension broke. Amara reached across him to grab the sugar. Their hands collided, knocking over his cup. Dark liquid spilled across his pristine white shirt, staining the expensive cotton. For a heartbeat, Ethan froze. The warmth of the spill spread, but what consumed him was the nearness of her, the way her breath caught as she reached instinctively with napkins. I'm so sorry, she murmured, dabbing at his chest, her face inches from his. The subtle fragrance of her perfume tangled with the sharp scent of coffee. His heartbeat roared in his ears. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything that would bridge the impossible gap between CEO and doctor, between the fortress he lived in and the light she carried. But words failed. His lips parted, and nothing merged. The door creaked open, and Nathan's voice cut through the charged air. Ethan, the Tokyo investors are waiting on the line. The spell shattered. Ethan stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair, retreating into the safety of his title and responsibilities. His shirt clung damp against his skin, but all he could feel was the echo of her touch, the warmth of her hand against his chest. That night, alone in his penthouse, he stared at the faint stain the laundry couldn't erase. For the first time in years, he didn't see a flaw. He saw a memory worth keeping. a reminder of how fragile his fortress had become. Nathan Brooks had seen enough. For weeks he watched his best friend, the man who could silence a room of ruthless investors with a single glance, stumble like a nervous teenager every time Dr. Amara walked into the break room. Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO, master strategist, was undone by spilled coffee and soft laughter. Nathan found it equal parts hilarious and frustrating. He decided the time for quiet observation was over. If Ethan would not move forward, then the office itself would give him a push. The plan was born late one night in the executive lounge over half-empty glasses of scotch. Nathan pulled together an unlikely alliance. Sarah from HR with her endless control of schedules, Miguel from maintenance who knew every flaw in the building's systems, and Chloe from the executive kitchen who oversaw the coffee supply like a general commanding her army. They laughed at first, but Nathan's determination was contagious. Soon, Operation Love in the Lab, as Miguel dubbed it, was in motion. The next morning, the elevator Ethan normally used mysteriously malfunctioned. When he pressed the button, the doors refused to close. Maintenance logs showed a safety inspection. Forced to take the stairwell, he discovered Amara already there, balancing a stack of research binders. Their climb together stretched into 10 awkwardly charming minutes, Ethan's hand hovering uselessly near her elbow as if he longed to steady her but dared not. Later that week, a boardroom double booking forced Ethan and Amara into the same small conference room. The table barely fit between them, and every time she shifted her notes, her sleeve brushed his arm. Ethan spent the entire meeting pretending to study charts while his pulse thundered in his throat. Sarah watched through the glass wall, biting back a grin as she sent Nathan a triumphant text. The conspirators grew bold. Miguel arranged for the air conditioning in the research lab to fail during the hottest afternoon of summer. Amara, flushed and frustrated, was invited by Sarah to use Ethan's office just for a few hours. Ethan nearly dropped his pen when she appeared in his doorway with her laptop, her presence filling the space usually reserved for silence and strategy. She sat up at the far side of his desk, and for the rest of the day the scent of her perfume mixed with the faint aroma of his cologne, binding the air with an intimacy that neither dared acknowledge. What the conspirators did not anticipate was Amara's sharp mind. She began noticing the patterns, the locked doors that forced her detours past Ethan's office, the conveniently timed power surges that left them waiting together in darkened hallways. One evening, after yet another suspicious coincidence, she caught Miguel smirking near the security desk. The realization dawned, and instead of irritation, she felt something unexpected: charm. They were rooting for her, for him, for them. And in her heart, she could not deny that she wanted the same. Ethan, however, remained oblivious. To him, the universe itself seemed to conspire to place Amara in his path. Each encounter chipped away at his carefully constructed armor. He found himself speaking more freely, sharing fragments of his life he had never voiced outside of Nathan's circle. He told Amara about his father's chess lessons, about the chippy, the black king that sat on his desk, about the loneliness that no empire could erase. Amara listened, her eyes soft with understanding. And sometimes, when he grew lost in thought, she reached across the table to straighten his crooked tie. The simple touch sent shivers through him, though he tried to hide it with a cough or a sudden distraction. One night, long after most of the office had emptied, Ethan worked late as usual. Through the glass wall of her lab, he could see Amara bent over her microscope, her face illuminated in delicate gold by the soft glow of the equipment. Something tightened in his chest. He realized then that the fortress he had built for decades was crumbling, and he was no longer sure he wanted to rebuild it. In the security office, Miguel watched the live feed and shook his head with a smile. He's falling, and he doesn't even know it. But Amara knew, and deep inside, she was ready to see just how far Ethan Carter was willing to fall. The annual charity gala at Carter Innovations had always been a glittering display of wealth and power. A night where investors, socialites, and board members paraded through the grand atrium in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. For Ethan Carter, it was usually nothing more than a suffocating ritual. But this year, as the chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, he found himself standing at the edge of the crowd with his pulse racing for reasons he could no longer ignore. Somewhere among the swirl of silk gowns and champagne glasses, Amara would arrive. The conspirators had gone all in for this night. Sarah from HR controlled the seating chart, weaving her magic so that Amara and Ethan would be placed side by side. Miguel adjusted the lighting, ensuring the terrace and dance floor would remain bathed in soft, romantic glow. Chloe personally coached the catering staff to serve Amara's favorite dessert at precisely the right moment. Even Nathan, usually the skeptic, had abandoned his teasing in favor of a single mission. Tonight, Ethan Carter would finally cross the invisible line between longing and action. Ethan tugged at his bow tie, his reflection staring back at him from the glass walls. The tuxedo felt different tonight, almost symbolic, like armor he no longer wanted. Nathan appeared at his side, clapping him on the shoulder. "Relax," Nathan said with a smirk. "You look like a man about to face execution, not a gala." Ethan tried to smile, but his eyes kept flicking toward the entrance. And then she appeared. Amara stepped into the atrium wearing a midnight blue gown that shimmered like liquid starlight. The gown flowed around her with every step, delicate and strong all at once, and her hair fell in waves that framed her face with effortless grace. The crowd seemed to part unconsciously as she entered, conversations faltering, eyes following her. Ethan's heart lurched painfully in his chest. She was radiant, untouchable, and yet somehow she was walking toward him. "Dr. Amara," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Mr. Carter?" she replied with a smile that was both shy and knowing. "You look different tonight." He offered his arm, and when she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, a current surged through him. The music swelled as though the universe itself had been waiting. The string quartet shifted into a waltz, and Nathan's voice echoed in Ethan's mind. "Dance with her, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Ethan had always avoided the dance floor, claiming clumsy feet and packed schedules. Tonight, he didn't care. He led her out among the glittering couples, his hand settling at her waist, hers finding his shoulder. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the world fade away. There was no board, no empire, no fortress, only the sound of violins, the sea, haunt of roses, and the warmth of Amara's eyes locked on his. "You're not running this time," she whispered softly, her breath brushing against his cheek. "Not from you," he admitted, the words escaping before fear could cage them. They moved together as though they had always belonged in each other's arms. The conspirators watched from the edges of the room, exchanging silent high fives and wiping away the occasional tear. Even Nathan, the eternal cynic, found himself grinning like a fool as he raised his champagne glass in a quiet toast. As the waltz melted into a slower song, Amara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. His pulse thundered beneath her touch, but he didn't pull away. For a man who had spent his entire life hiding behind titles and strategy, surrendering to this moment felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. But the gala was not a safe haven. It was a spotlight, and in that spotlight, danger was lurking. Cameras flashed from the corners of the room, capturing stolen glances and whispered confessions. Somewhere in the crowd, sharp eyes watched with cold calculation, already crafting tomorrow's headlines. Ethan, however, noticed none of it. For him, the gala was no longer a battlefield of corporate politics. It was the night he finally allowed his walls to crumble, if only for the woman in his arms. As the music faded, he leaned close, his lips brushing against her ear. "Come with me," he whispered. Together they slipped through the crowd toward the terrace, unaware that with every step, a storm was building outside the glittering walls. A storm that would test not only their fragile connection, but everything Ethan had built his life upon. The terrace stretched like a jewel box above the city, its glass railings opening to a skyline alive with lights. The gala music softened behind them, replaced by the low hum of distant traffic and the first warning rumbles of a summer storm. Ethan guided Amara out into the night air, his heart pounding harder than any business deal ever had. He had never meant to bring her here, never meant to step out of the safety of the crowd, but once her hand slid into his, he could not let go. They stopped at the edge, the city sprawling beneath them in restless beauty. For a long moment, silence reigned. Amara tilted her head back, letting the cool wind stir her hair, the midnight blue gown fluttering around her legs like a living flame. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating her face in fleeting silver, and Ethan thought she had never looked more untouchable or more within reach. "You hate these events," Amara said softly, not turning to look at him. "Why bring me here tonight?" Her question cut through the storm building in his chest. He could not retreat to corporate answers, not with her. "Because with you here," he admitted, his voice raw. "This is the first gala that hasn't felt like a prison." She finally turned, her eyes catching his in the glow of the city. There was no judgment, only quiet understanding, as though she had been waiting for this crack in his armor. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. "You don't have to pretend with me." The words undid him. His carefully built walls, the fortress of titles and strategies, all of it seemed to collapse under the weight of that gentle truth. He reached out, his hand trembling as it touched her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, soft and real in a way his world had never allowed. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her hand covering his, anchoring him. Thunder rolled closer, and the storm outside seemed to echo the storm inside him. For years, Ethan had run from intimacy, terrified of the vulnerability it demanded. But here, standing with Amara, he felt a hunger stronger than fear. He wanted her laughter, her fire, her presence that made even silence feel alive. "Amara," he whispered, her name catching in his throat. "I don't know how to do this. I've spent my life hiding behind numbers and deals. But with you," his voice broke, the confession trembling between them. "With you, I don't want to hide anymore." Her eyes softened, glistening in the flicker of lightning. She stepped closer until the distance between them vanished. "Then don't," she said simply. The world seemed to still. His breath mingled with hers, their foreheads brushing as the storm cracked above them. And then he surrendered. His lips found hers in a kiss that was both tentative and desperate, as though decades of loneliness poured out in one reckless act. It was supposed to be gentle, a testing of waters, but the moment her mouth parted beneath his, Ethan lost control. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her against him with a need that shocked him, that terrified him, that freed him all at once. Amara pressed closer, her fingers clutching his lapels as though she had been waiting just as long. The storm broke above them, rain beginning to fall in cool droplets, but neither pulled away. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, Ethan searched her eyes, terrified of what he might find. Doubt, regret, rejection. But what he saw instead stole the air from his lungs. Desire, mirrored and unshaken. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice unsteady yet certain. "You don't have to be the shy man who runs anymore. Not with me." His heart hammered as he leaned his forehead against hers. The city lights blurred, the rain fell harder, but none of it mattered. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter wasn't the untouchable billionaire, the flawless CEO. He was just a man, undone by a kiss, and he didn't want to be anything else. Behind them, through the glass doors of the atrium, cameras flashed. Somewhere, someone had already captured their moment, a secret kiss that would soon become a public storm. But Ethan didn't see it, didn't care. For now, all that existed was the taste of her lips, the storm around them, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that he was finally falling. The morning sun had barely risen when Ethan's phone erupted with notifications. Headlines screamed across every screen, bold letters twisting last night's perfect moment into scandal. Billionaire CEO caught in secret romance with employee. Gold digger. Doctor seduces the shy CEO. The photos were everywhere, their kiss on the rain-soaked terrace magnified, dissected, ridiculed. What had been private and sacred now lay exposed, cheapened for the world to devour. Ethan sat at the edge of his bed, the phone clutched in his shaking hand. His chest felt tight, not from fear for himself, but from dread of what Amara must be feeling. He could survive the gossip, the jokes, the scrutiny. He had done it before. But Amara, she was new to this ruthless spotlight. He knew the weight of public judgment could crush even the strongest spirit. His thoughts were interrupted by the call he dreaded most. His mother. Sophia Carter's voice, sharp and polished, filled the silence. "Darling, have you seen the papers? Your indiscretion is everywhere." "It wasn't an indiscretion," Ethan said flatly. "Don't be naive," Sophia snapped. "The board is already whispering. A CEO entangled with an employee. People will question her motives, your judgment. This could damage everything your father built. For the sake of the company, for your legacy, you must end this before it destroys you both." Her words struck like ice, but Ethan's answer came quicker than he expected. "I won't end it. I won't end her." His voice trembled with something fierce and new. "She's not the problem. The problem is people like you who think love is a weakness." He ended the call before she could respond, his heart hammering with rage and fear. Later that morning, he found Amara in her lab. She stood by the window, her tablet in hand, scrolling through article after article. The dark circles beneath her eyes told him she hadn't slept. She didn't look up as he entered. "Your mother called me," she said softly. "She offered to arrange a position for me at another research facility, Johns Hopkins. Said it would be better for everyone if I quietly disappeared from your life." Ethan's breath caught. "And what did you tell her?" Amara turned then, her face carefully controlled, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. "I told her nothing, because I don't know what to say." She set the tablet down, her voice trembling. "Ethan, look at what this is doing to you. To the company. Headlines, rumors, your mother, the board. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should go." "No," Ethan said sharply, stepping forward, desperate. "You can't believe that. Don't let them win. Don't let them take this from us." But her shoulders stiffened, her arms wrapping around herself like armor. "You don't understand. Your empire is your life, and I won't be the reason it crumbles. You may not care about reputation, but I do. Because this isn't just about us. It's about your father's legacy, thousands of employees, the entire company. How can we be together if our love destroys everything you've built?" Her words sliced him open. He wanted to argue, to beg, to promise that nothing mattered more than her. But the shadows in her eyes silenced him. He saw her slipping away, retreating into duty and sacrifice, just as he always had. The following days were torture. Amara avoided him, their interactions stripped of warmth, reduced to professional courtesy. She was polite, distant, as though nothing had ever happened. The office noticed the change immediately. Whispers shifted from romance to scandal, from curiosity to speculation. Nathan found Ethan in his office one night, staring at the black chess king on his desk. "You're both miserable," Nathan said, dropping into the chair across from him. "Why are you letting them tear this apart?" Ethan shook his head, his voice hollow. "I don't know how to fix it. Every time I try to reach her, she pulls further away. It's like she's building walls faster than I can break them." "Then stop knocking politely," Nathan snapped. "Fight for her. The Ethan Carter I know doesn't walk away from what matters." But before Ethan could act on that advice, another storm hit. During a routine audit, evidence surfaced suggesting that sensitive company information had been leaked to a competitor. All signs pointed toward the research division, toward Amara. The board moved quickly, demanding her suspension pending investigation. Whispers turned to accusations, and suddenly the woman Ethan loved was painted not just as a distraction, but as a betrayer. Ethan's world tilted on its axis. He refused to believe it, refused to let doubt poison what they had. But late at night, alone in his penthouse, Sophia's voice echoed in his head. "Can you be sure she didn't get close to you for access to secrets?" For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of suspicion pressing against his chest. And in that terrible silence, one question haunted him. What if the love he had fought so hard to protect was nothing more than the perfect deception? The boardroom felt colder than usual, a cage of glass and steel where whispered suspicions carried more weight than truth. Amara sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the accusations rained down. Words like breach of trust and espionage echoed against the marble walls. Ethan sat silent at the head of the table, his jaw clenched, his heart warring between fury and fear. He wanted to shout, to strike down every slanderous word, but the evidence displayed on the screens, fabricated though it must be, was damning. After the meeting, he caught sight of Amara in the corridor. Her posture was rigid, but her eyes shimmered with the pain of betrayal, not from the board, but from the man who hadn't defended her. Ethan tried to reach for her hand. She pulled back. "If you doubt me, even for a moment," she whispered, her voice breaking, "then we have nothing." She walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the shadows of his empire. That night, sleep refused him. He sat in his office with the black chess king turning endlessly between his fingers. Something about the timeline nagged at him. Ethan Carter had built an empire by finding the flaws in systems, the hidden cracks in perfect facades. Now he turned that same relentless focus on the accusations against Amara. Hours passed. He sifted through security logs, financial records, access reports. At first, everything aligned too neatly, every trail pointing toward Amara. Too neat, too convenient. His instincts screamed of manipulation. He pulled surveillance footage from the nights in question and studied frame by frame. And there it was, the first crack. A badge swipe recorded under Amara's name, but the timestamp placed her across the city at a medical conference she had attended. The system had been tampered with. The more he dug, the more the puzzle unraveled. Bank transfers routed through shell accounts, emails fabricated with cloned signatures. Every thread led back not to Amara, but to someone with both access and motive. His aunt, Beatrice. She had always pushed for a merger with her husband's conglomerate, a deal that Ethan had resisted. If Amara's reputation were destroyed and Ethan isolated, the merger would slide through without resistance. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His own family had orchestrated this. Leah, ked photos of the kiss, planted evidence, poisoned whispers, all to tear Amara from his side and tighten their grip on his company. Rage surged through Ethan, hotter than anything he had ever known. But beneath it, fear lingered. Fear that Amara would never forgive him for the hesitation, the shadow of doubt that had flickered across his face when she needed his trust most. At dawn, he left the office with a folder of evidence clutched to his chest, a storm of determination in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for Carter Innovations anymore. He was fighting for the woman who had scattered his carefully ordered life and shown him what it meant to feel alive. By the time the board reconvened the next day, Ethan was ready. He would expose the truth. He would destroy the lies. And for the first time in his life, he would fight not as a CEO, but as a man in love. But deep inside, one question burned. Even if he cleared her name, would Amara's heart still be his? Or had the seeds of mistrust already poisoned the one thing he couldn't afford to lose? The boardroom was packed with tension, every director leaning forward in anticipation of blood. Rumors had spread overnight that Ethan would be forced to suspend Amara, that Carter Innovations was teetering under scandal. Beatrice Carter sat near the center of the table, her pearls gleaming, her expression cool and confident. To her, victory was already certain. Ethan entered without his usual corporate armor. His suit was sharp, his stride calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. He placed a thick folder on the table and let the silence build until every gaze was fixed on him. "Before we continue this witch hunt against Dr. Amara," he said, his voice low but carrying across the room, "you need to see what I have uncovered." One by one, he revealed the evidence. Altered badge swipes, bank transfers leading to shell accounts, surveillance footage showing discrepancies in the timelines. Every piece dismantled the case against Amara with brutal precision. Then came the final blow. Emails linking the fabricated leaks directly to Beatrice's private network. The room gasped as Ethan's voice cut through the noise. "This was not the work of my employee. This was the work of my own family. My aunt engineered this conspiracy to destroy the woman I love and force a merger that would strip me of control over this company." Beatrice's mask cracked, her polished composure faltering as whispers erupted. "You can't prove intent," she spat, her voice trembling now. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can prove everything, and I will, unless you resign this very moment." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Nathan stood from his seat at the far end. "I second that motion," he said firmly. One by one, the board members raised their hands, their loyalties shifting like the tide. Within minutes, Beatrice Carter's empire of manipulation collapsed. Security entered, escorting her out as she hurled venomous threats that echoed down the marble corridor. When the room quieted, Ethan turned to the board. His voice softened, but the steel remained. Dr. Amara is not only innocent, she is the embodiment of what this company should stand for. Innovation, integrity, courage. And if any of you cannot support her, you may also hand in your resignation. No one spoke. Not a single hand moved. The meeting adjourned in stunned silence, but Ethan's victory felt hollow. He had cleared Amara's name, destroyed the conspiracy, and yet when he sought her afterward, she was gone. He found her hours later in her lab, standing by the window as the city lights flickered against the glass. She didn't turn when he entered. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "Instead, you investigated alone. You let me stand accused while you held the truth in your hands." Her words carved into him deeper than any boardroom battle. He stepped closer, his voice thick with regret. "I was trying to protect you, to be certain before I accused my own family. But I see now, I failed you. I let you face this storm alone when I should have been at your side." Amara turned, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. "Trust is more than protection, Ethan. It's standing together even when the storm is raging." He closed the distance, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. "Then let me prove it to you," he whispered, raw and desperate. "Let me fight not just for your name, but for us, because without you, none of this means anything." For a moment, silence stretched between them, fragile and infinite. Then Amara's fingers tightened around his, and Ethan felt the first fragile thread of forgiveness weaving itself back into place. But even as their hearts began to mend, he knew the war wasn't over. The world outside still watched, waiting to twist their love into scandal again. And as Ethan pulled her into his arms, he vowed that this time he wouldn't just defend her reputation. He would defend their future, no matter the cost. The city buzzed with rumors. News outlets replayed the leaked photos of Ethan and Amara on a loop, commentators debating whether Carter Innovations could survive its CEO's scandalous romance. Investors whispered about instability, journalists camped outside headquarters, and the gossip mill painted Amara as everything from a schemer to a corporate spy. Ethan had spent years perfecting invisibility in his private life, and now, with one kiss, the world's eyes were burning through him. That morning, he stood at the window of his penthouse, staring at the skyline he had conquered yet suddenly felt he was losing. The black chess king sat on his desk, the last remnant of his father's wisdom. His father's words haunted him. "All the money in the world won't keep you warm at night." Ethan knew the truth of that now more than ever. A press conference had been scheduled by the board, a carefully crafted statement meant to minimize the damage. Ethan was expected to appear calm, polished, detached, a man in control. But as he adjusted his tie and looked at his own reflection, he realized he couldn't keep hiding. The empire meant nothing if it came at the cost of the woman who had taught him to feel alive. When he entered the packed atrium of Carter Innovations, camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward in a sea of chaos. The board members waited behind him, tense and watchful, expecting him to follow the script they had prepared. Instead, Ethan stepped to the podium and pushed the notes aside. He looked out over the crowd, his voice steady but alive with fire. "I know you've all seen the photos. You've read the headlines. You've heard the accusations." He paused, letting the noise die down. "What you haven't heard is the truth. Dr. Amara did not betray this company. She did not use me or manipulate her way into my life. She is the most brilliant, dedicated scientist I've ever met. Her work will save lives, and her integrity is beyond question." Whispers rippled through the room. The board shifted uncomfortably, but Ethan pressed on. His voice grew louder, clearer, carrying not the tone of a CEO, but of a man stripped bare. "Yes, I love her. Yes, she is more than my employee. She is my partner, my equal, the woman who has shown me that there is more to life than wealth and power. I won't apologize for loving her, and I won't let anyone tear her down for it. Gasps filled the atrium. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras zooming in, the moment already spreading across the world. The board behind him exchanged looks of horror. This was not the damage control they had agreed upon. This was an earthquake. At the back of the room, Amara stood frozen. She had come only to witness the fallout, expecting Ethan to bury their love under polished lies. But now, hearing his voice crack with emotion as he defied the world for her, she felt her own defenses shatter. He wasn't just risking his reputation, he was risking everything, all for her. Ethan's eyes found hers across the room. His heart pounded, but he refused to look away. "I will not choose between love and legacy," he declared, his voice shaking with conviction. "Because the truth is, without her, I have no legacy worth defending. If anyone in this company believes otherwise, then perhaps this isn't the place for you." Silence fell, heavy and absolute. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nathan, ever the loyal friend, began to clap. Slowly, others followed. The sound spread, growing into something undeniable. The narrative was changing. Not a scandal, but a story of defiance, of love stronger than fear. Amara's eyes blurred with tears. She could no longer hold back. She pushed through the crowd, each step pulling her closer to the man who had just set fire to his empire for her. When she reached him, the cameras turned, capturing the moment that would redefine everything. She stepped onto the stage, her hand sliding into his, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Then let them all see," she said softly, only for him, yet loud enough to carry. "I'm not leaving. Not you. Not this." The atrium erupted. Cameras flashed, voices roared, the world spun around them, but Ethan only saw her. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers as relief surged through him. For once, he wasn't hiding, wasn't running. The shy billionaire had found his courage in the fire of love, and now the entire world knew it. But even as the applause and chaos thundered around them, a shadow lingered. Beatrice had been defeated, yes, but her influence still reached far beyond what the boardroom had revealed. And somewhere in that city of secrets and power, a new scheme was already brewing, one that would test their love in ways even Ethan couldn't yet imagine. The storm of flashing cameras and headlines slowly faded, but the scars of battle remained. Ethan had risked everything, his reputation, his company, even his family ties, for one undeniable truth. He loved Amara, and he would never again hide it. Yet victory had a price. Investors demanded reassurance, employees whispered about the future, and lurking in the shadows, Beatrice nursed her humiliation into something darker. But love has a way of remaking the world. Amara stood beside him through it all. At board meetings, her calm brilliance silenced doubts. In the lab, her breakthroughs reminded everyone why she was more than just the CEO's lover. She was the heartbeat of innovation itself. Slowly, Carter Innovations began to shine again, not just as a company but as a symbol of resilience. Ethan had never been more exposed, but strangely, he had never been freer. The walls he built around his heart were gone, replaced by a home he carried in Amara's smile. Nights once spent in solitude now bloomed with laughter and whispered confessions. His penthouse, once a museum of silence, filled with warmth. One evening, under the soft glow of candles in that very penthouse, Ethan held the black chess king in his hand. He knelt before Amara, his voice trembling with the kind of courage he had never found in boardrooms. "You scattered all my pieces that first day," he whispered. "And then you taught me how to build something better. Be my queen. Not just in this game, but in every game life throws at us." Tears shone in her eyes as she whispered yes, her voice breaking with joy. The shy billionaire who once ran from every touch now had the courage to lay his soul bare. And in that moment, Ethan Carter, once the loneliest man in the city, became the richest, not in fortune, but in love. Their wedding was small, quiet, surrounded by the few who had truly stood with them. Nathan got, via speech that left even hardened executives wiping their eyes. Sophia Carter, once doubtful, held her new daughter-in-law's hands with trembling pride. And as Ethan kissed Amara beneath a canopy of stars, the world seemed to pause, honoring a love that had survived fire and betrayal. Months later, the biggest surprise of all arrived. In a hospital room bathed in morning light, Amara cradled their newborn twin boys. Ethan sat beside her, overwhelmed by the sight of two tiny faces, one gripping his finger with surprising strength, the other sleeping peacefully against her chest. "They're perfect," he whispered, tears slipping down his cheeks. "William, after my father, and Daniel, after your grandfather." Amara smiled, exhaustion and radiance mingling in her eyes. "Our family, our beginning." Ethan kissed her softly, his heart fuller than he had ever believed possible. The city outside bustled with ambition and noise, but inside that room, time stood still. For the man who once thought success was everything, true wealth was now wrapped in two tiny blankets and the love of the woman who had changed his world. And so, the story of the shy millionaire and the brilliant doctor found its perfect ending, not in boardrooms or laboratories, but in the quiet spaces of family, trust, and forever love. Because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't technology or power, but two hearts that finally learn to beat as one.